everyone, and welcome to the Winging It F1 podcast, our Saudi Arabia Grand Prix review. A Grand Prix that I enjoyed. I thought it was a good race, and there were a fair few talking points to come out of it. Yeah, it was an enjoyable weekend, and I'm here with Nigel and Freddie, as usual, to discuss the race. So how are you both doing?
I'm doing very well. Back from my weekend getaway, got back in time for the race, so that's all very good. It was nice to see you guys fill in for the quite a reaction pod. I thought you did a very good job.
You didn't say that before the podcast, but thanks. I'm joking. No, yeah, I'm all right as well. I don't know why I said that. So that just came out, Freddie. Yeah, I'm all right. I think on the track, it was a great weekend. Obviously, off the track, there's a lot happening. But yeah, the racing that we did get was just fantastic, really.
Totally. It was a very storied weekend, wasn't it?
It really was, yeah. And we, as alluded to, then we discussed some of the stories from earlier in the weekend up to qualifying. Me and Nigel did on Saturday night. So yeah, we'll be discussing the race today. And I guess the first place, or the best place to start, is first place. Max Verstappen took his first win of the season, his first win since Abu Dhabi last year. And he left it quite late. He was trailing Leclerc for most of the race, and then there was a bit of cat and mouse at the end with the DRS zones, and in the end, Verstappen, who looked like he had the faster car at the end, was able to get the move done. So, Freddie, do you think it was a deserved win for Max Verstappen?
I think it was a deserved win for Max Verstappen and for Charles Leclerc. I think after the first safety car, it was a chase. It felt like both of them at points were running away from the other and hunting the other one down. And it felt frenetic for the whole thing. And they both were clever in their racing. They both were absolutely blistering in their pace. And what more do you want from a lead battle, really, than that? It was two drivers who are just naturally God-given immense people at driving cars, and they're very good, basically. And they showed it. They didn't put many feet wrong.
Yeah, very similar to Bahrain, I thought. They were both just going punch for punch, trading fastest, set to times, fastest laps after that first safety car. And it was just fantastic to watch, for them to pull away from Sainz and Perez, who are both, they're not exactly the worst drivers on the grid. They're both excellent drivers. So for them to pull away was just incredible. And then the battle we had, it was a great battle. It was a bit of a weird one with the way the DRS works and stuff like that. But I think both drivers were just so smart. If anything, Leclerc was a bit smarter for me because he caught onto it a bit earlier. Then it took Verstappen 3 or 4 laps to kind of do the move. But he did in the end. That's the main thing. He utilised the top speed of the Red Bull. Red Bull went for a low downforce package. And that might have been the only difference, really, because if Ferrari perhaps used a smaller rear wing, perhaps Leclerc could have held Verstappen off, perhaps. But apart from that, both drivers were just outstanding.
Freddie, agree?
Completely agree with that. Both outstanding. And I agree that it's mad that they were so far ahead of Perez and Sainz. Like, their pace this weekend was phenomenal as well. Obviously, Checo's pole and Sainz was up there all weekend on that pace. So it just seems to be that these two can get to such a level in the race that it's mind-boggling. At this early in the season, they can pull to such a level that it's one of those things that is just, we all spoke about sort of, I know, Lewis in Brazil, where he can just be just that extra bit mega, and it's kind of like, oh wow, are these guys just doing that extra bit already straight away together? That's a head of a conversation to have, but the fact that they just are effortlessly fantastic is brilliant.
I think Red Bull as well, they kind of planned that attack in the final 10 laps by telling Verstappen, save the tyres a little bit, save the engine a tiny bit, and it paid off in the end. So Red Bull, you got to give credit to them as well for doing that strategy. And then Verstappen obviously, was able to, do it really. So I think both teams did really well, and it's also a really respectful fight so far, of course. But both drivers,
refreshingly so.
Yeah, and I think it was just great racing, and that's exactly what we asked for. And so far, Bahrain and Saudi, we've had exactly that.
And on that point, it's really with kind of last season and Mercedes, and you can kind of see in interviews, and they cover this a lot more on Drive to Survive, that it's kind of war and it's a battle and it's a fight and you've got to sacrifice everything. There's big dramatic drum music in the background, and it's just like, I think I was getting a bit fatigued with that, just kind of like all out total warfare between Mercedes and Red Bull. And it is kind of nice to have that throttle back a bit and just focus on the track and have kind of great respectful racing on the track and not kind of so many antics off it. Whether we'll get that kind of throughout the season, I don't know. But yeah, I am really welcoming that so far.
Whether that's going to be the case at Japan or around that kind of stage in the season, we don't know. But there always felt to me like there was a lot of pre-baked in aggro from Red Bull to Mercedes, and it looked like they just pushed Mercedes to flipping back last year. Whereas I think just because it's Ferrari, and from Red Bull, there's a bit more kind of just respect with that, because Ferrari is Ferrari. Everyone loves Ferrari. Everyone's a tifosi in a small way, because you just look at them and think, yeah, they have to be there. Whereas I think Red Bull looked at Mercedes a bit more and kind of thought, you've stolen our crown. I think they look at Ferrari and think, you always deserve to be at least the prince. And I think there's a bit more kind of respect from just the Red Bull camp towards Ferrari anyway. And whether that goes back to sort of Christian Horner's leadership role, but also probably goes back to Red Bull kind of nicking Max Verstappen from under Mercedes' nose in 2014 and 15 and 16 and 17 and 18. Whenever Mercedes tried to make a sniff at him, that's all but confirmed really that all those snatches were attempted.
Yeah.
And on that, what did you both make of the kind of cat and mouse battle between Leclerc and Verstappen in the closing stages? And it was very much neither driver wanted to be first going onto the main straight because of the DRS. So do you think that ever crossed the line, or do you think it was just smart racing?
I think it was smart, very smart. I think Leclerc, like I said, was a bit smarter, if anything, because especially at the time when he braked and had floored the throttle with Verstappen, had a massive oversteer moment, which cost him. So I think Leclerc has shown his class, and again, and Verstappen last year, more often than not, he had the better of Hamilton when they were side by side. But I'd say so far this year, Leclerc has been slightly better. Definitely in Bahrain, and I'd say so in Saudi as well, even though he came second. So. I think it was clean, fair, exciting racing.
There's a nice new element that is kind of pacing the racecraft, and we always talk about looking after their tires and that kind of thing, and then going for an attack, and then the attack's kind of got to stick them. But this new kind of crazy kind of race format that we had there, a bit with the track and the double DRS zone there, really. But you will probably have something similar to that in Melbourne, you could say, as well, with the double DRS down the main straight and the secondary straight. They're not as long, but they're still a thing. And you look at that and kind of, it's a whole new level of racecraft. They've got to think laps and laps and laps. Well, they've always got to be 3 sectors ahead anyway in their mind. They've got to think to the next lap when they're doing a move. But you've also then got to think in the moment and think ahead of that. And the sheer capacity for this kind of racecraft is excellent. And it's a whole new level to it. And I think, even when Verstappen locked the rears at 10 miles an hour or something, and it looked like he's going to spin at one point when they were both locking up. Yeah, that was the only bit where you kind of think, but I think every point that's the right idea for the race, and that's racing, surely. So you can call it silly, but that's racing.
I think the car control, just the way that both drivers can apply the throttle, apply the brakes, turn at the right time, get close to the walls, take risks, all of that put together.
Breathe.
And to do it side by side, lap after lap. They've got tired bodies, tired minds. It's just incredible. Yeah.
They all look shattered, didn't they? Wow. I mean, absolutely beaten up after that one.
Yes, I agree. No, I think it's, again, it was kind of nice to see it, not crossing the line, because I think at points last season, and we discussed it at length on the podcast, the Verstappen Hamilton battle did cross the line. So yeah, I agree. It was, it was interesting racing. It was maybe unorthodox, but I don't think it was at that stage. Freddie, you want to say something? Speed.
We had a similar principle with, looking for DRS with Max and Lewis, but it felt unsafe. At this point, that racing felt controlled and excellent. It didn't feel like it was crossing a line. I don't know if that's because it's race 2 and not race 21, and whether there would have been more of a kind of a few fewer inches spared if it were that point in the season at this track, and maybe we'd be blessed with it being at this point when everyone's hunky-dory. But it's much better to see it in this way than it was in 2021, a race I think we all lost hair at. Yeah.
I mean, I think you saw, maybe not to the same extent, but even at the start of last season and at Bahrain and Imola, the two that come to mind most, you did still see there was that, both drivers going completely to the edge. And I just think that's not there this season. So yeah, I think we've said enough on that, unless anyone wants to add any more.
All it's going to take now is one incident.
That is a good point.
And then it could all, go wrong. And
yes, true.
And that could happen in Australia. It could happen in Silverstone. It could happen in Brazil. So yeah.
Yes.
Place your bets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Nigel, do you think Perez was unlucky, or do you think he would have lost out in the end anyway?
Yeah, I think he was unlucky because, well, I don't think he would have won, but he certainly missed out on a podium because had it been normal, even Verstappen might not have had him with the way the pit stops worked and stuff like that. So it was definitely unlucky, and up until then, he'd had a perfect weekend. Pole position, great start, was comfortably leading, and then Leclerc kind of forced him into that pit stop with some great pace there. But yeah, a bit unlucky. And then after that, he just never got going because he had to give the place back to Sainz for the pit exit merge, which was a bit controversial. And then yeah, we didn't really see too much of him after that. So there wasn't too much more Perez could have done. So yeah.
Freddie.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said earlier that Perez and Sainz, their pace was really good all through the weekend, and it just seemed to be that it looked like Verstappen and Leclerc went to another level where they both could sense the win and that they would be the fight. I did feel earlier on that Leclerc was humouring Perez a bit and just pacing himself. Whether Ferrari tricked Red Bull into a pit stop, we don't know, but
they did.
I think they did, considering they're like, ooh, box to overtake. Oh yeah, let's box to overtake. What are we going to overtake? And they did without boxing. And I don't think Perez would have won from where he was, but I think he did phenomenally, and it's such a shame he was messed over with that. And I would say I would actually think Sainz is less likely to win the championship than Perez now, based on that weekend. For some reason, that's just the gut instinct I have, and it's completely wrong based on everything.
You can't say that based on 2 races.
No, you
can't. But
you can't be certain of it, but you can still
it's just
say it.
Hence the likely, not certainty. As I said, you're right, Adam. But it's just where my gut sits now. It changes every day, though. You know this, Nigel. But that's where my gut sits now. And
every second.
I was really impressed with Checo this weekend. So
I don't think either of them are likely to win the championship, really. But yeah, it's just the way it is. But yeah, I think
there was a great
Perez
quote. There was a great quote from Nico Hulkenberg, who said, someone's like, "Oh, all to play for this weekend." He goes, "Well, mathematically, I can still win the championship, so let's go." Fantastic.
That is fantastic. I thought Perez was unlucky. I thought he definitely should have got a podium at least based off how he was doing in qualifying, but it's the way the sport and the way F1 works. And yeah, he was lucky, but he also lost out. He lost out to Leclerc and Verstappen in the pit stop window, and then he subsequently lost out to Sainz at the safety car restart. And Nigel, you had some thoughts about the stewarding this week, including that.
I'm not happy about that because the Sainz lost the chance to attack Verstappen. Why did they swap them during the safety car? I don't know, because it was quite clear that Sainz was, ahead at the white line. I don't understand why they didn't swap them. So if I was Sainz, I would have. Well, Sainz clearly wasn't happy, but I don't think it was right, and it's something to look at. And it was one of quite a few decisions which I thought, why did that happen, kind of thing. So
I agree.
Yeah, that's the first of them. I have no idea why, and it was kind of glossed over as well because Sainz ended up finishing third, and it might not have made a difference to the final result, but you never know. Sainz could have attacked Verstappen, but he didn't get that chance.
Sainz deserved that for the safety car restart. You're right, and the only reason I can kind of think of, and it shouldn't be the reason, I can only think of that it's a definite way of making sure Perez doesn't keep the position is to say do it when they're at racing speed, not do it before the safety car. And I just think if it is that's stupid.
They do way bars.
Exactly. So it seems a bit kind of bizarre that wasn't done, and it was clear to the naked eye. So poor decision, but hopefully Sainz has been beating his drum about that. So I reckon that'll be in the driver's briefing in Australia.
Yeah, that's the thing for me. I hope they do kind of learn from it or kind of make a clarification on that, because it's not even like a difficult thing to measure, really. It's literally, you look at the replay, you pause it when one of them hits the safety car line or the pit lane exit line first, and that's that. It doesn't seem to, it shouldn't have been that difficult to get to the bottom of, I think. So yeah, it's not, luckily it kind of didn't affect the race win outcome, and it was kind of battling for the podium rather than win. But yeah, I agree, it kind of, it was messy for F1.
The thing is, F1 have introduced this VAR type system for this year as well, which we haven't seen yet, we don't think. Surely this is the type of incident which would have been perfect for it. It was like, they've clearly made a mistake. So then someone should have been telling race control, reverse the position, surely.
It's also the type of incident where, actually, I think I might have answered it now. It's also the type of incident where they say, no, I haven't answered it. Sorry, you can see the
anyone
cogs
watching on YouTube will have seen cogs going around in Freddie's head then.
So it's the kind of incident that the race directors have said, sort out amongst yourselves now, guys. We're not going to tell you what to do. And that's being given a lot of press, that kind of mentality. And I think because it's a safety car line, that becomes a bit of a hard line for them to walk, whether they actually intervene or not. And I think they didn't really want to intervene. They wanted the teams to sort it out themselves. And then which kind of things, I was kind of like, the reason my cogs were worrying was because like maybe Red Bull then wanted to protect Verstappen by making Perez do it at the restart and then saying, we are going to do it, we're going to do it at the restart. But then I kind of thought, well, no, because surely they would want to prefer to get Perez on the attack rather than on the definite giving up of a position. So I don't know if that's something that's been weighed up from that, and if it's got nothing to do with race control. But
then you could say Russell could have got Perez down, possibly.
Exactly. So it's a theorem at best. It's not even a hypothesis, because I don't think it's probably the case.
I think from the steward's end, that would make sense. That was kind of something I was considering before, but I think if that is the logic that they're using, that's extremely flawed, because it's not like we've just said, it kind of messes up the balance and kind of the natural order of how things should have been from the restart, and teams are getting advantage and disadvantaged out of that. So I think if that was something from the steward's end, I think, I'm not kind of necessary. I don't know. I don't kind of wholeheartedly agree with the not getting involved for things like this anyway. But even in this scenario, then I think they it's a pretty cut and dry thing to get sorted. So yeah, that was that. I mean, the whole period, the going to yellow flags and then virtual safety car and taking like quite a long time to go to safety car seems strange to me anyway. I think it was a bit of a weird, the way they handled the whole thing was a bit strange, but there we go.
Yeah, they were very hard line on Zhou Guanyu leaving the track and gaining an advantage, and they gave him a 5-second penalty, which led to even more calamity for him later on, but that's not for now. So I think with this, they didn't want to tackle it, and then kind of should have tackled it, because they're kind of thinking, oh, it's something they should organise between themselves, and because it's a safety car, they've got time to do that. So I think they were trying to just say, do it yourself. We don't need to look after you. But I think they should do when it's a thing like a safety car line, really, because that's it gives them time to deal with it. It's not like it's wasting their time by looking at every single time someone goes a little bit wide.
The other thing or one of the other things that kind of annoyed me about race control was that when they chose to not have a safety car, but a virtual safety car when Ricciardo and Alonso stopped. I thought, because like when they're doing the virtual safety car speeds, they're still going past at 120, 130. When depending on if they're braking or not and stuff like that. So, and I just think if there's marshals pushing two cars on a tight track and the cars are flying by, that is the time for a safety car. So I was a bit surprised at that. And it also took quite a long time as well, because they could have closed the pit entry straight away, but they didn't. And instead it allowed Magnussen and Hulkenberg to pit. So they took too long to do the procedure, and then they chose the wrong procedure, I think. So that was another bugbear.
I agree. I tweeted about this as well. It's
Freddie
hard.
Coates, whatever. Sorry, I forgot your Twitter.
That's 1999.
That's it. I can remember if that was your Instagram or not, and I don't want to be outing you, so.
No, my public Instagram. Let's not give it away. At Freddie.Coates. And but yes, I tweeted about that and on my Twitter, not my Instagram, and basically said, it's actually a really serious point, which feels very flippant now. But yeah, it seems this track is way too narrow for a VSC at any point, surely, that kind of thing. And particularly that part of the track, which is so high speed and so narrow, and you're going to have cars sort of weaving around with wanting to go into the pits and things like that. So and when the pit lane isn't being closed for so long, and it just feels like with marshals running on track, their thought isn't, oh, it could be a car behind me. Their thought is, I need to do the best thing to get this car out of off track. So give them a safety car, give them the time to not be stressing about running with a car. Same with when they had the safety car with Latifi's crash. They just drove a crane right down the narrowest part of the track. Didn't we learn from Formula E in Saudi? But no, apparently not. So
they did that in the Formula 2 sprint race as well. They had two big cranes next to I think it was Jack Doohan and
Sargent.
Someone else who crashed. That's it. Yeah. You had two massive cranes, and the field had to all slow down. They just got by. It was ridiculous, quite frankly.
And with the Formula 2, there was a big story from that with was Chembolic Bassi not being able to start the race because he had concussion, and it took 4 minutes for the crews to get to him after his crash in qualifying. I think that's ridiculous. Practice, okay, that's ridiculous. They should be there on the scene immediately. That's unbelievably slow, and I think that's appalling performance from just either if it's just the position of marshals, then there needs to be a lot of review of the circuit. But
I agree with all of those points. I think especially the VSC, it was just kind of scary, really, when you're seeing the cars going past the marshals that really aren't that far away. I don't see why you wouldn't call a safety car then. I don't see what the kind of downside is to that, or what the upside is to calling a VSC instead. It just seemed a really strange decision, and things just seemed a bit off all weekend, as you've touched on in great detail already. And hopefully, to be honest, hopefully that this is something that they go over now, so that it's not coming up, with more serious consequences, because it's one of those things that it really, any of these things that we've listed doesn't take that much to go into a really catastrophic scenario. If there's just a bit of difference in a crash, then all these things matter 10 times more. And I really hope they are proactive in that and look at it and change, or just change the mindset, because it I don't know whether it is a rules thing. It just seems to be mindset.
I completely agree with that. Mindset's a really good point to make, because I think there's been a sort of clamour for some time that there should be differences in the way things are handled, where they're just not. And particularly with the crane point, and trying to save racing action, if you will, it becomes kind of difficult in my mind to see why at all these cranes are being in this position. There should be, should there be more access points? Should there be cranes that can go over? We don't know. What's a key way of doing this? It's really it's red flag for 5 minutes. You can do a red flag and say we're going to do it for 2 minutes, and do that kind of thing, and say don't get out your car. It's just because we want to put a crane on track for 2.5 minutes, say, and you can do that. You can change the regulations to make that a thing, because they change the regulations to make things like that a thing all the time. It's just there's some kind of things, a red flag has to be given like 10 minutes warning or something of a restart. So they're hesitant to do that. But you can change regulations for safety, and it's essentially forced through because it's usually a good idea. And stuff like this isn't.
Just the last point on the virtual safety car thing is, I think on proper street tracks like Jeddah, like Singapore, like Monaco, I don't think a virtual safety car should ever be used unless a car is parked next to a marshal's post and there's a gap and you can just pull it in. Apart from that, I don't see any other scenario when a virtual safety car should be used. It should always be a safety car, or it should be a red flag. And that is the rule I would have. So,
yeah, I think that seems sensible. And I think we're all just kind of hoping that this is a bit of a change before their serious consequences. So either of you got anything to add on any more incidents in race control corner, or we?
I think there's a reason. I think the race shouldn't have ended under green or double wave yellows in sector 1. From what we saw of the Stroll Albon collision, where Albon was parked up, I think maybe they should have finished under safety car with that, or at least finished under VSC for that.
They definitely should have. They definitely should have penalised Magnussen, Sainz, and Perez, I think, because those 3 drivers were investigated for speeding. And Sainz, I mean, I've not seen the other footage, but Sainz, he barely lifted. I think he lost about 1/10 through that corner, which is absolutely nothing. Yet he gets away with it. And I think with these things, especially when we've got new race directors as well, they've got to, go in hard, be strict, set a precedent, quite frankly, because now the precedent is you can get away with it. And that is absolutely not right. So that's another annoying thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all agree with that. And again, just really fingers crossed that it does change and that safety. I won't say it to be clear and obvious that safety is the number one concern. That's kind of it. And at the moment, it doesn't feel like there is 100% on that. So hopefully that changes, but we shall see. Moving on, the other big story of the race was Hamilton eventually coming back to finish 10th. He was running, I think, in 6th for some of the race. He had a decent fight back and was aided by a lot of people pitting in the first safety car, but that meant at the end he had to pit. There was the pit lane closing when Ricciardo and Alonso both retired on lap 35, and that really put a hammer into his race. And he had to pit a not great time, slide back, and he did manage to recover and finish in the points. But do you think it was the right strategy call from Mercedes to start him on the hard tyre to begin with?
I think so.
I think with hindsight, no, because of what happened.
Oh,
because
well, in hindsight.
it couldn't have, that first safety car couldn't have come at a worse time, because it was after 15 laps when the medium tyres had done enough laps. So then you can get to the end. So then that really killed his race, really, along with Hulkenberg and Magnussen. So,
but I don't think with hindsight, yes, that did. But I think going into that race, starting on the hards, I think was a very good idea, because they will go for a long time. You can let there be a bit of carnage unfolding and work around that and gradually creep up while other people do early pit stops. And really, chances are there could have well been a red flag, and then he puts on some mediums at the red flag, and it's in sixth, sitting pretty. So I think it was the right strategy to go for at the start. I think, it didn't work because of the just really the timing of when he went round past Ricciardo, which is unfortunate, because had he been 5 seconds back, he would have pit and it would have been wonderful. Might not have made the greatest deal of difference to his race based on where he ended up with Magnussen anyway. But I think the strategy was actually on paper actually pretty good, but it just was messed over, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would have done the same thing. It was just misfortune, just like Perez when he lost the net lead. It was just like that.
You can do it next time.
Yeah,
I think it's not kind of inconceivable. Like, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but on a track like Saudi Arabia, I don't think it's inconceivable pre-race to think that having a safety car around then. It seemed
if
very
a red
possible.
flag comes out on lap 35, then Houghton's right in the ballpark, isn't he?
But I don't.
We had two last time in Saudi, 2 red flags, numerous safety cars around that. Well, kind of yellow flags around that. So you kind of expect that there would be that it could well come to you, very likely.
But I think you can also expect that there'll be a safety car, kind of in
at the wrong
around the pit window. I don't think I don't think it's one. If it was at Silverstone or Monza or something like that, I'd go, that was kind of unforeseeable. But I think they ran the risk. I think it was kind of a more high risk, high reward strategy for them, which really is what they've got to be trying to do at the moment. And Nigel doesn't agree with that. But
because if he starts on the mediums, he's just going to follow everyone else. He had to do something different.
I don't think he will. I think the way he made up ground on the hards, I think he's still doing that on the medium. It's just relying on his racing skill to do it, rather than and get maybe a bit less far up the grid.
When you think about it from the safety car perspective, if there wasn't a safety car and he started on hards, he would have been detached at the back. If he'd started on mediums and it would have been a, say, ordinary race, he would have had the pace earlier on to make up a few positions while the pack's closer together. That's harder on the hards, no pun intended. But it's, I see where Nigel's coming from. It's kind of like you are relying on a safety car and that kind of thing. And I agree with you, Adam. That's a high risk strategy and it was the right thing to go for. But starting on the hard, I mean, we don't need to have this conversation. They had this in Mercedes on Saturday night. This is what happened. That's what happened. End of. He finished 10th. He got 1 point. That's cool. Let's move on.
I think that slightly has sledgehammered the entire concept of race review podcast. But anyway, we will try and soldier on past that.
The reason he was down there is because of his shot and qualifying anyway. So that's the main thing. Really.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we got to ground something. Yeah, I was shocked, as we discussed on Saturday.
On the fact that his starting position was 15th and he qualified 16th.
Yeah.
So, moving on from that, I think the other main thing that I want to talk about, I know Nigel has a few more things on his list, but the main thing I want to talk about is the Alpine battle, which was absolutely fantastic. That was one of the highlights of the race because it was so tight. It kind of brought other drivers into play, and I really enjoyed watching it. That being said, what were your thoughts? Do you think it was the right thing for Alpine to do? Where do you kind of stand on the teammates racing? Just a discussion on that.
I think it was incredibly exciting, but I do think some of the moves were from Ocon's side, personally, I think were a bit over the line in terms of
Yes.
racing. And we've seen this with Ocon a lot, that he loves a move under braking, and that's not on. So I think Ocon needs to tone it back a little bit, and I don't think he will, which is worrying. But I think, do you remember in Silverstone in 2020, Grosjean stayed out and did all these sketchy defensive moves, and
Yes.
that was like one of the biggest talking points of that race was how crap that was. And I think Ocon's moves were like that, and it's just cars are closer this year, and the closing speed looks even worse and stuff like that. So it's something that I kind of thought, I don't like that. I thought most of the racing I thought was thrilling. I thought there were a few over the line. I think there was one chop that Ocon did on Bottas that was really bad. That I really didn't like that. But I think for the most part, it was really good fun, and I like it when, back to your original point, Adam. Sorry, I sidetracked that, but I like it when teams let their drivers fight. I do think drivers do need to respect the team, particularly in the midfield point. Well, somewhere like Alpine are, where they were in a good position, they were able to fight where they were. They had good pace, and Alonso had more pace, and Ocon deserved to be able to hold that position because he earned it in qualifying, and Alonso had more pace in the race, deserved to race for that position. But when Bottas is in your mirrors, and then you've got I want to say Magnussen right there as well, closing in on that. That's when you start to think, okay, guys, hold it now, work together, build a gap. This isn't the end, but we're Alpine. You were employed by us. You were members of the team. End of. And I think that got lost a touch at points in that. But I think that's just for something for Alpine to look at. I think they were helped a bit by Bottas actually overtaking Ocon, and meaning they didn't have to worry about it anymore. And that shouldn't be the case.
I think I think Ocon was a bit desperate for me, especially when he tried to re-overtake Alonso twice and he cut the chicane. And that's just a little bit too far for me. Like to do that against your teammate, it's not too bad when you're doing it against someone who's not your teammate, but to do it against Alonso, perhaps a little bit too far. But I think it comes back down to the teams, and the team didn't tell Alonso or Ocon to not race that hard. So I think it's a case of, if the team did tell them to stop racing and they carried on, that's when it's the driver's fault. But the team didn't say anything. So I think for me, because the team didn't say anything, it was all right. And I think it was just very, very hard on the limit racing.
Yeah, I really, really like it. I think I really like it from Otmar, and he was on Sky Sports kind of as it was going on, and Crofty was trying to kind of, I don't know, trying to goad him into an answer. Yeah, and trying to, get him to say, we want the drivers to stop, and he didn't. He was just saying, we'll see how it plays out. And I think it's fantastic. I think I've not kind of heard anything from Alonso or Ocon really saying they didn't like it. If you're a driver and you're a racing driver, if the two drivers are staying on the limit, that should be what you live for. And yeah, I think it's fantastic. And in the end, the road will decide, the track will decide, and that whether we'll see that kind of later in the season when there's more at stake, I don't know. But I think now at this point, for preserving kind of team harmony and team equality at the moment, as much as anything else, then I think it's a good move, and hope. It'd be cool if more drivers do it.
I think it's a problem accentuated by the 3 DRS zones and the fact that this track seems to be really helpful for drivers having another pop, and with their pace being so similar, that was always, I think they probably didn't anticipate quite how much they'd be able to continue to fight with each other. But I think, I agree with you, Adam. It's thrilling stuff to see cars racing. That's why we do this. So seeing that, and some really, for all the stuff we've just said about the aggression, there was some really proper good bits of racing in that too.
Yeah, and that's the only other thing I wanted to say is these cars really seem to be able to follow well. On a track like this, which is just, like the antithesis of what was good for the cars of last generation, I thought these just seemed such a step forward on that. I know having the 3 DRS zones helped, but yeah, I just thought.
But this is a prime ground effect racetrack, high speed corners, meaning that's when the floor is at its working at its most, and that's what these cars are focusing on the most. So these kind of tracks are designed for these cars. A slow speed track, I think, is going to be very, very different and interesting to see. But with such a high speed track like this, that's exactly designed for the cars to race in this way. And there's a reason Ocon said it was like a go-kart race. And yeah, I completely agree, Adam. You're bang on.
Thank you. So,
bang tidy.
Any of the drivers that either of you want to give shout outs to, or list, or harangue?
I think Haas and Alfa Romeo will be disappointed, because I think they had the cars that were definitely good enough to score points. I'd even go as far as saying Haas had the 3rd or 4th fastest cars. Just Magnussen having never driven at the track, and then Schumacher not even starting the race. They only ended up scoring 2 points. So I think they'll be a bit disappointed that they couldn't make the most of the strong car that they've got.
Yeah.
The same with Bottas, with him dropping out when he was 6th or 7th, I think he was. So that's a shame as well. And, we don't know how these cars are going to be developed, and Alfa and Haas might look back at this race and think, we missed out on a chance to get 5th, 6th or 7th there. So I think those will be the 2 teams that are most disappointed probably from this weekend.
I think I agree with that. I think obviously Haas went into the race with a hand behind their back, with Mick's crash from qualifying and not taking part. Magnussen's neck also came off in qualifying, so we couldn't. He said he should be 5th, but anyway, you're bang on with that. And I think the only thing that really kind of let them down, is Alfa Romeo seemed to manage that race very poorly, in my opinion. I think the car had the pace. I don't think they did very well with basically just the way they managed it. We saw that with everything to do with Zhou Guanyu's race being something that seemed to be just putting him further and further back, and he still finished 11th somehow.
Because there are only 12 finishers.
True.
Well, that's a good point. But he's still ahead of people. I think there were 13, weren't there? Or
there was
Stroll. Is that classified? Oh, okay.
Yeah, classified. But Stroll and Albon.
That's different. Okay, that was different in my mind then. But it was just kind of like he had a penalty, probably deserved penalty, and then just they seem to put the jack under the car during the 5-second penalty, and then take it out, and then put a different jack under, and then they gave himself a 5-second penalty, which then gave himself a drive-through. So that was poor, because I did probably then, at the grand scheme, at the end of glorious hindsight, as this podcast is probably going to be titled, could have been a point, could with Hamilton's woes, who knows? Maybe he could have been able to be in a better position around there. You don't know. So it's not. They need to they've got the pace to be midfield teams. You need to act like one now.
Yeah, exactly. We saw this last year as well. It went a bit unnoticed because Alfa didn't have a great season last year. But Raikkonen and Giovinazzi, there were some awful strategic decisions and pit stops from Alfa last year. And then now they've got the pace. Now they're under the spotlight a bit more. It's coming back to hurt them. So they've got to sort this out, because it's been happening for at least 12 months now.
Yeah, I think, nicer problems to have than being detached at the back of a race. But yeah, there's ground to be made there. I think they'll be disappointed. I think the most disappointed driver will be Yuki Sonoda, because he went to Saudi Arabia and didn't turn a wheel in anger over the weekend, and he had a power unit issue that stopped him taking part in the race. So that's another one. That's a 4th in 2 races for Red Bull. So lots to look at for them there and digest. But we aren't engineers, so I can't give any more insight than that.
Yes, they won't be calling us to digest their engines.
No. Well, if they are, then they're in big trouble. Freddie, any other drivers you want to touch on?
I don't think it was a good weekend for Nicholas Latifi.
That's fair.
I think he obviously crashed in qualifying and he crashed in the race. And the crash in qualifying did look a bit more out of control and like a bit harder one to catch. And you could say it's one of those ones. The crash in the race seemed a bit more odd to me. But yeah, I think it needs a good weekend in Melbourne, which is, early for someone to need a good weekend, but he needs a good weekend.
Yeah, because his Bahrain wasn't good as well. His Bahrain, not as bad as Saudi, but his Bahrain was pretty below average. So yeah, he's probably been the worst driver so far this year.
I know. I'm normally the first.
Unfortunately.
I'm normally the first to say, look at this positive part of Nicky's performance, because I think, particularly 2021, he actually had a very good season, and people are quick to judge Latifi because he's not George Russell and that kind of. But he did have a very good year, particularly the latter half of that year. But it's just, I don't know. Hopefully, he can get his handle around this new generation and move forwards with his performance. But the first two races have left a lot to be desired there.
And I think the only other team I want to touch on is McLaren, a massive improvement from Bahrain.
Yes.
Going off what Norris said, when he said they are really, really bad in the slow corners, I do fear that this could be the high point of the season. Now, that might sound crazy, but considering the track layout, the high-speed corners, there's not too many more tracks like this apart from what Silverstone and Spa, perhaps. So it wouldn't surprise me if McLaren end up, getting knocked out in Q1 over the next 3-4 races. This could be the best result for quite a while. I hope I'm wrong, obviously, but I don't think McLaren fans should be too, jubilant about 7th.
I think scrapping for 6th is brilliant for Norris and just testament to the driver. And Ricciardo was actually up there this weekend as well. So good for him. Needed to have a good weekend. Ricciardo did have a good weekend. So until the
end.
Apart from the end, right? His side was good. So he's going into his first home Grand Prix since 2019. So hopefully, with the new track revisions there, we'll probably talk about that in a podcast next week. But the track revisions there lending themselves to a bit more speed. Who knows? Maybe they'll help McLaren a bit more. Maybe they'll have got a few more handles on. Probably the first race we'll see some proper upgrades. Naming no Mercedes new floor rumors. Klaxon. But anyway, we'll see. And I agree with Nigel.
Great.
Moving on to I agree with Nigel. I say that too many things now. But this podcast, it's amazing we managed to drag it out, considering it should just be Nigel says something and I say, I agree with Nigel. And then we end the podcast.
It never used to be like this. Something's just changed this year. I don't know why.
You've grown up. Bless him. He's figured out how to have the right opinion.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up. I think the other thing to mention is Mick Schumacher was released from hospital. So we'll await updates for him in Australia, but it looks positive from there. And we will be back to look ahead to Australia and, first Australian Grand Prix in a while. So it's nice to have that back, some changes to the cars and the track. So we'll be there to discuss that. But for now, thank you very much for listening and goodbye.